Tanks were a huge game changer during the First World War. These steel beasts allowed soldiers to gain the upper hand when attacking the enemy, but like many things in warfare, they had their disadvantages. One of these was the inability to tackle difficult terrain such as mountainous regions and deep waterways. But it would be the Second World War where the world would see the use of tanks which could handle this issue. Their combat debut would be during one of the most decisive battles of the whole war. In today's video, we look at the swimming tanks of D-Day. If you enjoy this video and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It's free and really helps the channel reach more history lovers like you. As early as the 1930s, experiments were taking place with tanks crossing water. For the most part, shallow water was no problem. It was deep water which British inventors sought to conquer. This Vickers-Armstrong tank design featured a lightly armoured tank with a crew of 2. It was able to travel at fast speeds and, as you can see, had the ability to move through deep water. The light armour of this tank would become useless once the Second World War came about, but the ideas behind its design would be put to use to create the DD or duplex drive tank. The invasion of Normandy was meticulously planned down to the finest detail. Paratrooper and glider-borne troops would be dropped behind enemy lines before thousands of soldiers would begin to land on 5 beaches. The troops on the beaches were expected to face the hardest German resistance, and Allied planners needed a way to provide them with tank support quickly. This was one of the lessons learned from the disastrous raid at Dieppe. The DD tank was created with the main idea of using buoyancy to keep the tank afloat. The main aim was to have the buoyancy device quickly discarded once the tank made it to land. This is where the DD's canvas curtain comes in. The screen was made of a waterproof canvas and fitted around the entire top of the tank to metal hoops. The screen would inflate through tubes positioned at intervals and could be filled relatively quickly with compressed air. Once the tank entered the water, with the curtain up, it now provided enough distribution to keep the tank afloat. This was originally designed for the British Valentine tank. However, the main downside was the need for the Valentine to face its main gun to the rear when the canvas was up. So the decision was to use a Sherman tank instead. Still, a few hundred Valentine DDs were created and mainly used to train troops for their eventual Sherman DDs. These tanks also featured 2 folding propellers at the rear, which could be controlled by the driver or the commander. The driver using a hydraulic system and the commander using a large tiller at the back. Trials for the tanks took place prior to D-Day on a number of occasions. During one operation in April 1944, 6 DD Valentines would sink under adverse weather. Lessons were learned from these trials, but ultimately improvements were at a minimum. The true test for these vehicles and their crew would be their first foray into combat on June 6, 1944. On the morning of D-Day, tank divisions across all 5 beaches launched DDs towards France. They were mostly launched from tank landing craft and set off about 3 kilometers or 1.8 miles from the beach. Due to the rough seas on the day, they had varied results. For the Canadian and British beaches, the majority made it to shore. For example, 21 of the 29 at Juno Beach made it to the sand. For the Americans, it was a tale of 2 beaches. At Utah, of the 28 DD tanks launched, 27 would make it safely. But Omaha Beach, as with so many issues that day, it didn't go as smoothly. Of the initial 29 DDs launched, 27 would sink. This was mainly for 2 reasons. The waves were incredibly high for the tanks, and water came over the top, causing the tanks to lose buoyancy. The other reason was due to the landing craft setting the tanks off much further away from the beach at around 4.8 kilometers or 3 miles. Ultimately, the lack of armoured support on Omaha was a contributing factor to the devastating losses seen there. For those tanks that made it ashore across the beaches, they were able to engage German defensive positions and help the soldiers get off the beaches. Drawing heavy German fire gave the infantry a chance to take out enemy strongpoints. Following D-Day, many DDs would ditch their canvas curtains and continue the campaign. Other DDs would see some use crossing the Rhine later in the war, but for the most part they had little use after Normandy. Still though, a very interesting and ingenious use of engineering during World War II. What did you think of the swimming tanks of D-Day? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.